Under the glowing banners of the Galactic Accord, hundreds of alien species gathered in harmony, or so they claimed, but deep beneath the surface of polite diplomacy, whispers of mockery spread like wildfire every time a human walked by. On the metal floor of the Accord's High Command Station, boots of every kind scaled, hoofed, armored, marched with purpose. But the human steps were the ones that earned scoffs. Weak, slow, fragile, that was the common opinion of humanity. No claws, no natural armor, no enhanced senses, no psychic link. Just skin, soft bones, and too many emotions. When Earth joined the Accord, the Council agreed only to a symbolic military inclusion, allowing a few humans to wear the uniform but never the true responsibility. Sergeant Elias Cross was one of those few assigned not because of his skills, but because his name was easy to pronounce. He stood quietly aboard the dropship bound for Verelian Prime, a desolate jungle moon where the Xarn, the galaxy's most terrifying enemy, had begun building hive structures. The Accord needed to secure a forward base there, and their elite squad was made of the strongest warriors from across the stars. Every species had sent their finest, except Earth. Elias sat in silence as the others spoke in tongues and clicks, glancing at him with thinly veiled amusement. The braggart bruiser, taller than any doorframe, chuckled whenever Elias adjusted his armor. The Volothi sniper whispered that humans wouldn't last 5 minutes in a real fight. Elias said nothing. He had learned long ago that words did nothing, only actions stayed in memory. As the shuttle descended into the thick green clouds of Verelian Prime, Elias checked his weapons for the 3rd time, not out of fear, but out of habit. The briefing was simple: set up the outpost perimeter and prepare for extraction in 2 days. Easy, according to the others. But Elias noticed the unease behind the Volithi's confidence, saw the twitch in the Cornic engineer's hand. Something was off. The jungle below looked wrong, alive, in a way that suggested it was watching. The shuttle landed with a hiss, and they spread out. The trees were massive, wrapped in vines that pulsed faintly, as if carrying blood. They moved quickly, establishing turrets and sensor drones, while Elias was told to watch the gear like a glorified intern. He did as ordered, scanning the jungle with quiet eyes. Hours passed. The others laughed, drank strange liquids, and shared battle stories, while Elias sat alone near the crates. Then came the sound, barely audible, a low hum beneath the wind, like the breathing of something vast and ancient. Elias stood and reached for his rifle. The laughter stopped as shadows began to move between the trees. At first, it was dismissed, just the jungle playing tricks, but then the sensors died, one by one, in a pattern too precise to be random. The braggart roared and charged forward, only to vanish into the green mist. Screams followed, short, choked, final. Chaos erupted. Shapes leapt from the trees, tall, insectoid, with shifting limbs and eyeless faces. The Xarn had found them. Panic overtook the elite squad. The Volothi sniper fired wildly before something silenced her from above. The Cornic's armor cracked like glass as claws tore through it. The team broke formation, scattered like prey, every warrior for themselves. Elias didn't run. He grabbed explosives from the crates and set traps along the approach, using the terrain, fallen logs, roots, vines as natural defense. He pulled the wounded to cover, applied pressure to wounds with trembling hands, and returned fire when targets presented themselves. Hours passed in bloody silence, broken only by screams. By dawn, the only movement was the steam rising from alien corpses and the slow breath of a lone human crouched behind a broken turret. Elias Cross, armor cracked, face streaked with blood and mud, stood over the last functioning radio and called for evac. No one answered. He wasn't surprised. The Accord had likely assumed them all dead. As he stood among the fallen, his rifle lowered, he looked around not for more enemies, but for signs of life. There were none. The jungle had swallowed the elite squad whole. All except one. Elias didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired, used, forgotten. But he had survived, not because of strength or power, but because of something the others never valued: preparation, caution, and the refusal to give up. Somewhere far above the jungle moon, The Accord Command would receive a distress beacon with one name attached. And for the first time, the galaxy would hear it not in mockery, but in awe. The jungle moon of Varelian Prime lay silent in the early hours, its thick green fog curling around shattered trees and scorched earth, hiding the truth of the battle that had taken place the night before, a battle no one had expected to lose. The Accord had sent their best, the strongest, the fastest, the most deadly warriors from across the galaxy to secure a foothold on this hostile world. But now they were nothing more than twisted forms scattered in the undergrowth. Only Sergeant Elias Cross remained, wounded, exhausted, yet somehow alive, crouched near a broken relay, his ears still ringing from the chaos. The iron had not left. He could feel it in the air, the hum of their presence, like static on his skin. He moved carefully among the bodies, collecting weapons, ammo, and supplies from the fallen without letting his emotions break through. There was no time for grief. The Braggarn's massive rifle, nearly twice Elias's size, had fallen beside a scorched crater, its owner reduced to nothing more than burnt armor. He dragged it under cover, knowing even if he couldn't fire it, the ammo packs were worth their weight in gold. His hands shook slightly as he fitted parts together, rewired a broken turret, and planted new traps. Each motion was calculated, focused, mechanical. His mind replayed the battle again and again, how the elite warriors had fallen so fast, their strength useless against the Exern's speed, their training useless against the Hive's brutal instincts. No commands had saved them, no shields, no tactics. They were overwhelmed, outnumbered, and terrified. Elias remembered the look in the Valethi's eyes just before the creature struck from the canopy wide, glowing, full of confusion. She had always believed herself superior, but in the final moment, she was only afraid. And now Elias, the one they had mocked, the one sent only to make Earth feel included, was left to carry their failure. He couldn't afford to rest. The sensors had failed the night before, but he managed to get a single motion detector working again and watched its blinking screen carefully. 1 blip, 2, then 3. The Xarn were regrouping. They weren't done. Elias knew this was only the beginning. He retreated into the wreckage of the outpost's command shelter and set up a perimeter. He wasn't going to run. If they came again, he would make them pay for every inch. He still had energy cells, sharp metal fragments, chemical fluids, everything he needed to make improvised defenses. As he worked, he thought about Earth, not the clean halls of the Accord, not the voices that called humans weak, but the long training sessions in worn-down bunkers, the endless drills, the lessons in adaptability. Humans had always been survivors. They never won by being stronger. They won by refusing to quit. He laid the last explosive behind a ridge of fallen trees and waited. The jungle creaked and moaned around him, as if alive, and then came the sound, the same low, vibrating hum that had signaled death the night before. Shapes moved between the leaves, faster than shadows, and Elias raised his rifle, his finger steady on the trigger. The first Arn leapt forward, sleek and armored, but it triggered a trap, and the blast tore it apart midair. More came silent, aggressive, crawling on walls and leaping through the air. Elias shot with precision, moved with speed born from instinct, dodged claws and spitfire, used the wreckage as cover. It was not clean. It was not perfect. But it worked. One after another, the Xarn fell, not to strength, but to stubborn defense. For every inch they took, Elias made them bleed. He was wounded twice, once in the leg by a sharp spike, once in the shoulder, but he kept going. Hours passed. The ground was littered with twitching alien limbs. Elias leaned against the remains of a supply crate, blood soaking through his torn armor, his breath shallow, his eyes scanning the mist. There was no cheer, no crowd, no medal. Only silence. Only survival. Then, through the haze, a voice came static, broken, but clear enough. The backup team had received his earlier signal. Extraction in 30 minutes. Elias laughed softly, though it hurt to do so. 30 minutes was a long time on Varelian Prime. He stood, reloaded, and moved to the highest ridge near the outpost's edge. He didn't know if more would come, but if they did, he would be ready. When the dropship finally arrived, its engines roaring above the trees, they found a single man standing among the ruins, surrounded by the corpses of the galaxy's worst enemy, holding a smoking rifle in one hand and a half-burned flag of the Accord in the other. No one spoke at first. Even the seasoned pilot stared in disbelief. Elias didn't explain. He just boarded the ship, sat down, and closed his eyes. The day the elites fell would be remembered in whispers for years to come, but it was also the day the galaxy saw what a single human could do when left with no choice but to fight. Elias Cross woke in a medical bay that didn't feel like Earth or any place he remembered. Bright lights above, cold steel walls around, the low hum of machines keeping him alive, and as he tried to move, pain flared through his side and leg, sharp and real, proof that he had survived Virelian Prime, though just barely. Doctors spoke in hushed tones nearby, voices full of disbelief. They had never seen someone return from a Xarn-Hive battle with so many injuries and still breathing. The story of what happened on the Jungle Moon had already spread, carried by the recovery team and confirmed by drone footage. The lone human who held off an entire Xarn assault, while the strongest warriors of the Accord were slaughtered in minutes. Many called it a fluke, some called it luck, but others looked closer and saw the truth. Elias had not survived because of luck, but because he refused to die. Even as he lay strapped to machines, with bandages wrapped around his chest and synthetic skin grafts on his arms, requests for interviews and debriefings poured in. Generals wanted reports, scientists wanted scans, and alien leaders who once ignored humanity now asked questions about Earth's training methods. But Elias didn't care about any of that. He kept quiet, healed slowly, and spent his waking hours watching old field recordings, studying Xarn movement, finding flaws in their tactics. He knew the war wasn't over. The Accord had pushed the Xarn back temporarily, but everyone with sense knew they would return, and stronger than before. After weeks of rest and physical therapy, Elias was finally cleared for light duty, though many still doubted he would ever return to combat. He walked with a limp, his shoulders stiff from nerve damage, but there was a fire in his eyes that didn't fade. One night, while reviewing a security log, he caught something strange. Patterns in the Xarn attacks across several worlds suggested they were targeting command posts where Elias had been mentioned. It was subtle but clear. The Xarn knew who he was, and they were hunting him. Instead of fear, Elias felt a quiet determination grow. If they wanted him, then he would be the bait, but on his terms. He requested reassignment to the front lines, not to lead, but to support, to advise, to observe. The High Command refused at first, calling him too valuable, but he insisted, and eventually they gave in. They sent him to Outpost Thera, a remote but important listening station on the edge of Xarn-controlled space. Elias arrived with little fanfare, walking past guards who stared at the man from the stories. The outpost commander, a Torkin named Veal, greeted him with polite distrust, unsure why a broken human had been sent to such a vital location. Elias didn't argue. He simply got to work checking defenses, drilling soldiers, reviewing old battle footage with anyone who would listen. Slowly, the troops began to respect him. He never raised his voice, never boasted, but when something broke, he fixed it. When someone panicked during a drill, he calmed them. He had seen true terror and survived, and others could feel that in how he moved, how he spoke, how he never looked away from the dark corners. Then, without warning, the Xarn came. They struck in the middle of the second week, bypassing sensors with a cloaked swarm that tore through the outer defenses in seconds. Sirens wailed, troops scrambled, and chaos erupted, but Elias was already moving. He led a squad through maintenance tunnels to flank the attackers, placing explosives in choke points and rerouting power to defensive turrets. Every motion was precise, every order clear. As the Xarn breached the main compound, Elias triggered a chain of traps that slowed their advance, buying time for evacuations. But it wasn't enough. The command center was breached, and Elias ordered everyone out. He stayed behind alone again to seal the doors and trigger the final charge that would collapse the entrance and bury the Xarn beneath the outpost's own walls. When the dust cleared, the base was in ruins, but the Xarn were dead, and Elias, somehow, stood in the wreckage, bloodied but alive. A rescue team found him barely conscious, his body broken in 3 places, but his hands still gripping the detonator. News of the second survival shocked the Accord. Twice now, Elias Cross had faced impossible odds and walked away. Rumors called him immortal. Soldiers called him a symbol. Aliens who once mocked humanity began requesting human soldiers for their squads. Earth's training programs were suddenly in high demand. Yet through it all, Elias remained silent. He didn't fight for glory or revenge. He fought because someone had to. In the quiet hours between missions, he rebuilt what he could, wrote reports no one read carefully, and studied the Exarn again and again. He knew they weren't just beasts. They were learning, adapting. And if the Accord didn't change with them, then even heroes wouldn't be enough next time. But for now, the galaxy whispered a new name with fear and respect, not of a species, but of a single soldier. The one who wouldn't die. The sky over Delta 9 burned orange as thick smoke rose from shattered buildings, blackening the stars above, while screams echoed through the broken streets, and the ground shook with every step of the approaching Zarn swarm, moving like a living wave of claws and teeth toward what little remained of the Accord's resistance. The command bunker deep under the city's ruins was filled with panicked voices, overlapping orders, and flickering displays showing one red mark after another, each one a fallen unit. Generals barked commands, officers argued about retreat, but none noticed when a man entered, his armor worn, his face scarred, his eyes calm. Elias Cross stood in the doorway, silent, his presence spreading through the room like cold air. Someone whispered his name, and the room fell quiet. No speech followed. Elias walked to the display, studied it for 10 long seconds, and pointed to a narrow canyon 2 clicks east of the city. "We hold them there," he said simply, his voice steady, his tone certain. The generals hesitated, but his eyes left no room for doubt. That canyon was where the terrain gave them a chance, where air support could reach and explosives could make a difference. He didn't waste time convincing them, he moved. Soldiers followed, some curious, some afraid, some simply willing to follow the man whose story was stronger than any rank. As they traveled through wreckage and ash, Elias worked. He ordered gun nests built into collapsed buildings, placed charges along broken roads, turned wrecked vehicles into barricades. Every decision was fast, sharp, and purposeful. The troops saw it. This wasn't a man throwing himself into battle. This was someone who knew what survival meant. By nightfall, they were ready. The canyon was dark, narrow, surrounded by high rock walls and the last working turrets in the city. Elias stood at the front, his rifle across his chest, watching the horizon. Then came the sound, that familiar, awful hum, low and deep, vibrating through the stones and bones alike. The Exarn were close. A scout returned breathless, reporting thousands moving in fast. Some soldiers began to shake, others whispered prayers, but Elias gave no speech. He only looked back and said, "They bleed like anything else. Make them bleed." The first wave hit the traps, a series of precise detonations, turning the narrow approach into a tunnel of fire. Screeches echoed as the creatures fell into the blast zones, and the turrets opened fire, cutting down the front line. But the Exarn didn't stop. They never did. They climbed over their own dead, swarmed along the cliff walls, hurled acid spit and tearing limbs forward. Chaos surged through the canyon, but Elias was already moving. He directed fire, patched wounded, dragged a soldier from the edge of death while still returning shots with inhuman focus. At one point, a Xarn brute broke through, its claws inches from the line, until Elias leapt atop a ruined crawler and drove a grenade into its open chest, diving clear. Just as it exploded, the troops cheered, their fear turning into fire, into action. They held the line. Hours passed, and the Exarn kept coming. But for everyone that broke through, 10 fell. The plan worked not by strength alone, but by positioning, timing, and pure will. Elias fought beside them all, bleeding from a deep cut in his side but never slowing. He moved like part of the ground itself, unshakable, untouchable. As dawn broke, the last wave finally cracked. The Exarn retreated, something never seen before, dragging their dead and wounded into the fog. The battlefield fell silent but for the heavy breathing of those still standing. Elias lowered his rifle, scanned the horizon, then sat quietly on a broken ledge, his chest rising and falling slowly. Around him, soldiers looked at each other in disbelief. They had won. Not escaped, not delayed, won. Word spread fast. Across the Accord, across every world watching in fear, the victory became a spark. It wasn't just the Xarn losing. It was the first real hope the galaxy had seen in years. And at the center of it all was Elias Cross. He didn't ask for medals. He didn't want a speech. But they came anyway. Messages from Earth, from alien leaders who once called humans weak, now pledging new resources and troops. For the first time, the Accord stopped underestimating humanity and started learning from them. Commanders reviewed Earth tactics. Combat drills were rewritten. Teams asked for human advisors. The tide of war had shifted, not because of machines or numbers, but because one man had shown them a different way to fight. Not with pride, not with fury, but with grit, with patience, with the kind of courage that didn't shine, it endured. And though Elias knew the war was far from over, for the first time, he believed they had a chance. Because if the Xarn could be pushed back, they could be beaten. And if one soldier could change the path of the entire war, then maybe others would follow. The turning tide had begun not with a fleet, but with a man who simply refused to fall. Elias Cross stood alone on the cliffs of Ravok's edge, staring across a shattered horizon where fire still rose from broken enemy ships and the ground smoked with the ashes of the last great battle. Knowing deep inside that this was not the end, but the final beginning, the moment history would turn. Not because of power or numbers, but because one man had refused to give up when everyone else had fallen. Behind him, the valley below was filled with thousands of soldiers, humans, Bragern, Torkin, Volethi, and other Accord species, each one carrying scars from battles past, each one staring at the same rising sun, waiting for what came next. But Elias did not turn to speak, did not raise his voice or hold a banner. He simply adjusted the strap on his rifle and stepped forward into the wind, his body still worn from the last push, his arm wrapped tight from a wound that had never fully healed, his mind sharp with the weight of what still needed to be done. The Xarn hive was broken, but not dead. Deep beneath the blackened surface of Karos Prime, their queen still pulsed in darkness, guarded by what remained of the elite swarm, and if they were not stopped now, they would rise again stronger, more furious, more aware. No one else wanted to lead the final strike. The high commanders spoke of risk and casualties, of waiting for more ships, of gathering more intelligence, but Elias knew delay would only give the Xarn time to rebuild. So once more, as he had done on Virelium Prime, on Outpost Thera, on Delta 9, he chose to act while others hesitated. He took a team volunteers only into the tunnels below, into a nest of death and silence, with only courage, instinct, and desperation to guide them. The descent was long and slow. The tunnels twisted like veins through the stone, and the deeper they went, the colder it grew. Every step echoed. Every breath felt like it might be the last. One by one, they were attacked not by large swarms, but by shadows, by creatures that slipped through cracks in the walls and struck with poison and speed. Some never made a sound when they fell. But Elias moved ahead, silent, alert, leading without needing to speak. He knew the patterns. He had studied them endlessly. The hive was a living thing, and like any living thing, it had rhythm. He followed that rhythm deeper, until the narrow passage opened into a wide, black chamber filled with glowing veins of energy, and the slow, heavy breathing of something massive. The Queen. She did not move at first. Her great eyes opened slowly, as if sensing his presence, and a low sound rolled through the chamber like thunder. She was beautiful and terrible, towering above the ground, surrounded by armored guards and clusters of twitching egg sacs. Elias raised his rifle but didn't fire. Not yet. He signaled to the others, placing charges along the outer edge of the chamber while he walked forward, heart steady, breath slow. The Queen screeched then, a sound that shook the very bones of the earth, and her guards lunged. The battle was instant and brutal. Claws clashed with steel, acid hissed through armor, and screams filled the darkness. Elias moved like a ghost, never stopping, never hesitating, placing the last charge near the queen's root core before being knocked down by a blow that cracked his ribs. Blood filled his mouth, but he rose again, limping, weapon gone, knife in hand. The others were falling, one by one, but he didn't stop. He ran straight for the queen as she reared back, her mouth wide, her limbs sweeping down. He dodged, leapt, rolled, and drove the blade deep into a glowing vein at her chest. She screamed, shaking the chamber, and he pressed the detonator just as her claws tore through his side. The explosion was blinding. Fire roared through the hive, collapsing the walls, turning the chamber into a storm of dust and light. The soldiers waiting above felt the ground tremble and feared the worst. Minutes passed. Then one figure stumbled out of the smoke burned, bloody, armor half melted, but standing. Elias Cross. He had survived again. The queen was dead. The hive collapsed. The war, at long last, was over. The Accord sent ships, medals, honors. They tried to give him a title, a parade, a monument. He refused them all. He didn't want glory. He had never fought for that. He had fought so that others wouldn't have to fall like those he had buried, so that no soldier would ever feel forgotten again, so that humanity could stand equal with every race and prove that courage was not about strength, but the will to rise when everyone else falls. Elias disappeared after the war's end. Some say he returned to Earth. Some say he walked into the edge of space to find peace. Others say he still fights in secret where new shadows rise. But across the stars, in every base, on every world once touched by war, his story is told again and again, not of a superhuman, not of a legend, but of a man who stood alone when it mattered most, and because he stood, others found the strength to rise. The Accord changed after him. The soldiers changed. The galaxy changed. And though time may blur the details, one truth remains unshaken: Elias Cross stood not for himself, but for everyone. And in doing so, he taught the stars what humanity truly meant.